And that's often forgotten, which is outrageous. You know, I mean, it's other groups take it, but it was the transsexuals who were out there doing this stuff. 74, the gay teachers group. I tried to find rainbow chairs, but couldn't quite get it, but you could get the idea. And John Warburton, you now have heard about, and wasn't it wonderful hearing all that wonderful stuff? Okay, zip on. 85. Now, 85 is really important. Ken Livingstone was incredibly important. I mean, I'm London-based. Tony's Luton-based, and he will tell you why in a minute. But Livingstone really did make a difference. Now, what's interesting was that Livingstone wasn't the leader when the GLC first got in. He did a little coup and became the leader afterwards. But his thinking about LGBT issues and women's issues and race issues and disabled issues was phenomenally ahead of its time. And he did some really important stuff. Prior to that, as you've just heard, the London Education Authority, which was under the GLC, was a disaster. So Ken really did, change things around massively, which was incredibly important. So bless him. And of course, he paid the price, didn't he? So Thatcher then comes along and crushes it. I mean, what was fascinating was, if you were in London, you had the Westminster with Thatcher sitting there, and the GLC on the other side of the river, diagonally opposed, and it was really lots of nodding heads. It was just, it was war. Bodoink, the river between them. Okay, 87. If you don't know this quote, you should. It is such a powerful quote. And I think what it's saying is, and Lord Halsbury was the very first person to start talking about what became Section 28. Just look at that quote and tell me, is this a man who is frightened? Is this a man who actually puts his crap onto us? So we will push him off the pavement? Actually, how many of us want to push anybody off the pavement? We want a wide pavement that we can all walk along. But he had this fantasy that we wanted to push them off the pavement. And that was where all of the 28ers were coming from. Fear, ridiculosity and horrendousness, basically. 88, the Arts Lobby, Ian McKellen, Michael Cashman, Simon Fanshawe, all got together at the Arts, at the Drill Hall, which had been the Arts Workshop. No, I can't remember what it's called before. But the Drill Hall has an amazing history of supporting LGBT arts work. It isn't that we've lost it. RADA have now taken it over. We used to have our Schools Out conferences there, because Julie had done massive work there, and Maida Seaman had done amazing work. Julie and I tried to teach Ian McKellen, Michael Cashman, Simon Fanshawe how to be activists. It was fun.
Thatcher, of course, at the Tory Party conference introducing Section 28 in the legislation, came out with that remarkable quote: "Children in our schools are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay." And how many people thought, would that they were? Absolutely amazing. And I need to say, people who were at the last NUT conference and saw me speak, I don't want you to put your hands up because you know the answer. But what have Poland and Italy got in common? No. They're the only two countries in Europe that never criminalised homosexuality. And in 1987, I escaped this country. I went to Italy, intending never to return because of Thatcher. And at the time, Italy, compared to Britain, was a gay El Dorado. Now, given that they have ignored every single piece of European legislation in the noughties, trying to give LGBT people rights, so they've got no partnership rights, they've got no protection in the workplace, it's amazing to think that way back then, Italy was a much better country to be in, if you were like me, than Britain was. So it shows how far we come forward and how some countries should start to step forward as well.
Okay, masses of work, and here we are in Manchester. And Manchester was an absolutely powerful attacker of Section 28. And if you haven't seen it, go to Manchester Town Hall. It's the only town hall in the country that I think that would ever have done this. There is a plaque in Manchester Town Hall which celebrates the anti-Section 28 march. And I think that's such an indicator of the politics of Manchester. And it's just wonderful to be here in Manchester. So thank you for giving us all here. Great. So masses of stuff. I think one of the exciting things was that I was being very earnest, spending masses of time going off and photocopying stuff and killing photocopy machines. Because I mean, you can't imagine how bad it was to try to do stuff. I mean, I can remember Gestetmans. Do you remember Gestetmans? Yes. information out was really hard. Now it's a press of a button with an email, you know, but I mean, in those days it was really hard, and I was driving from voluntary sector to voluntary sector to photocopy stuff, and all these machines were dying. And I thought, photocopy machines are homophobic. It just ridiculous. Okay, so I'm living in Southwark along with Peter, and also Linda Bellos. So poor Southwark really does get a bashing from powerful, strong LGBT people, don't they, Peter? Not that I think we make much difference sometimes, but anyway, we do it. And we produced one of the first conferences on tackling homophobia, and Paul and I wrote a teacher's pack, which is still on the Schools Out website, and basically it's probably still quite current. There's a couple of things in there that I would probably change, but not a lot. So that was really important. This is, of course, one of the biggies. And for me, it was one of the landscape moments of change. And the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and the whole process of how the Stephen and Lawrence process worked. I mean, we have Mary, who's one of our trustees. I think we're still having a meeting to do it here yet. She was the head at Eltham. I've been teaching in Eltham, so I know the joys that are Eltham. But I think the Stephen Lawrence report, and the fact that, you know, all of us knew about institutional racism, but the fact that that word came out and people began talking about it, that there were all those recommendations to change, that the criminal justice system took a lot of it seriously, and of course it is a uniform thing, so if they say jump, they do have to. The Department of Education, to this day, still has not done some of the recommendations that were asked by the Stephen Lawrence, which is such a total indicator of what we have to fight with the apathy of the Department of Education. My fury to the Department of Education knows no bounds, basically. Yeah, go.
95, I joined Schools Out, and it was at a conference that was held in Birmingham in Nightingale's nightclub, and on the eve of Birmingham Pride. And I remember they took all the light bulbs out of the lights in the little rooms in the nightclub. So my abiding memory is attending a workshop that was being facilitated by Tim Lucas in a dark room. What an amazing experience. But as Tim also said, when you join a union or you join an organisation, you can suddenly find yourself wrapped up and involved in it, and suddenly you're taking on jobs that you never believed possible. So I was immediately made a national contact. My telephone number was put in the Gay Times. You can phone me there. Most of the people who did phone in at the time were male teachers who were finding that they'd been employed by the school. And of course, they filled in their CRB checks, and the local authority got wind of the fact that they'd committed a cottaging offence, or they'd been in a cottaging offence. They'd been done for indecency. They were in danger of not being employed. The contract, even though it was signed and sealed, it could be broken. And we had no way of promising them that they would be safe, and that was the situation in the 90s. Another case that was ongoing was that of Shirley Pierce. Shirley Pierce was a chemistry teacher who was bullied horrendously by her students on the grounds that they thought she was a lesbian. There were terrible things they did, like they put cat food in a white coat, and they called her a Lennon, and they did all sorts of dreadful things. And she left, and she claimed subsequently that it was constructive dismissal because the school hadn't protected her from the abuse that she was suffering. And she fought a case with the NASUWT with the support of the Schools Out, and it was lost, unfortunately. It went on to the High Court, and it was lost finally on the grounds that it was under the Sex Discrimination Act, and it was lost on the grounds that the Sex Discrimination Act didn't cover sexual orientation, and therefore she was not protected. There was no question that she'd been bullied horrendously. There was no question that the school had failed in its duty of care, but there was no law there to protect her, or the law that was there to protect her wasn't active. Sue was there throughout. She went with Shirley and tried to look after her. The final lawyer who lost the case for us, who was fighting for the school and for the authority, was none other than Cherie Blair.
Which was kind of weird, because the case that she'd done before was supporting the two women who wanted domestic partnerships as train drivers. So whether it was the cab rank or whether she thought, well, she'd won that case for the lesbians, so perhaps she better take a top of them. Goddess alone. Very weird. The thing that was interesting after the McPherson report was that, I mean, I had been badgering the Department of Education for years. They never set up an advisory group. They never, ever invited me to anything. I always had to knock on their doors and scream. After the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, because I had already been linked up with the police, thanks to members of the independent race group, had brought me in when the Paddington fire happened, because the police were not thinking about that anybody in the Paddington fire could be members of the LGBT community at all. So they brought me in to get them to think about those issues. They then started to, then the Errol Duncan thing came off, and then they thought, oh, perhaps we'd better have an LGBT group. And John Greaves, who was at that point running the diversity group, and who had chosen his independent race group, excuse me, I don't quite know how that can be independent if the police have chosen him, wanted to set up an LGBT group and thought he would do it the same way. Unfortunately for him, I heard about it. So a year later, and it took us a year, Linda Bell asked myself and Blind Dyke that we worked with, Kirsten. We set up a process to enable independent advisory group, and that process that we wrote and designed is now the process is used right the way across the country on employing or setting up independent advisory groups for Metropolitan Police. And I'm kind of proud of that a bunch of dykes and some gay men as well who were working around cottaging issues, which was really, a big issue with the police at that point. We together produced something which has now had that longevity, so that's great.
Can I just say, when Sue says a blind dyke that we work with, she's coming from a loving place.
It's what Kirsten called herself.
94, don't forget, of course, was the age when that advocate of LGBT rights, Edwina Curry, campaigned to have the age of consent equalised. And there was that horrible compromise agreement that had me throwing mud at the television when it was decided that the age was going to be reduced to 18 for same-sex couples. So it's still discriminatory. That didn't change until 2000.
Yeah. When we get a Labour Party in, I just need to say that the Labour Party were very slow in supporting us around Section 28, and it took them to 2003 to get rid of it. However, having said that, they have done great things. Department of Education, very much thanks to a wonderful woman called Teresa Clark and Ivan Lewis, set up a piece of work which went across the country doing anti-bullying work. We said that nobody would go to anti-bullying workshops unless there was somebody on the stage. Oh, don't be silly, they said, of course they will. Well, the first conference was in London, Schools Out was there, Stonewall was there, workshop set up, not a person came. Not a person came. So, from then on, I was allowed to be on the stage with Esther Ransom doing a double act, which was quite fun. And then people started coming to the conference. So that's the one thing that I will say the Department of Education, thanks to Teresa Green and Ivan Lewis and Esther, were proactive about. And Elly has done some work with DAB now, haven't you? You've been there.
Trying, yes.
Yes.
Lots of times.
Yes. Well, this is the biggie. This is the real biggie. 2003, watershed moment, really. And it's very much thanks to Shirley Pearce. I mean, what Tony was saying was, the people who wrote the Sexual Orientation and Employment Act had looked at what happened to Shirley and learnt from that and actually made sure that we were then covered. So 2003 is the first time that LGBT people cannot be sacked within employment. And I mean, that's a flick of an eyelid away, isn't it, time-wise? I mean, it is utterly ridiculous. But it is an incredibly important year, I think.
Can I just say also, before this time, in the late 90s, the co-chair, or the chair of Schools Out was John Burns. John Burns was an NUT member, something of a moderate man, but he worked hard within the auspices of the NUT and within Schools Out to get the very best casework he could for LGBT members. And he always campaigned for casework to be reported back to the union so that people knew the extent of homophobia that was taking place in our schools. And he worked very, very hard, both in the eastern region and the southwestern region, for NUT members and for Schools Out members throughout. John Burns, unfortunately, died before his time in the late 1990s, and we remember him with Saunders Day.
And he was followed by Steve Bonham, who was with us. Wave. Thank you, Steve. And he picked up the torch, carried it forward, and it was thanks to Steve that we even have a website. You kicked that off, didn't you? So thanks for that. Really important. Paul and I had been talking for some time. We'd seen the power of Black History Month and been thinking about, why don't we have an LGBT History Month? And when I got wind of the equality duty that was coming up, the Single Equality Act, Labour were talking about that in 2004. It didn't get passed in 2010. How Harriet Harman kept her wig on, I don't know, but she did. I thought, right, well, this is the time to do it. This is the time to launch LGBT History Month. We went to the DFE. I do swear about them, but they did give us a bit of money, so I should be grateful. And we were in Southwark at the time. I'd been doing a lot of work with the Southwark Anti-Homophobic Forum. I went to them, and of course the new Tate Modern had just been opened there. So very excitingly we were there. And who else was there? Nick. Yay! Our photographer. So he was the first, I think you're the only member of the committee who was there that day. And it was a bit silly, wasn't it? There was more of us on the stage almost than there were in the audience. I was determined to show the diversity, because Schools Out, LGBT History Month, we're passionate about, we are representing the diversity of LGBT people. We're in every group, so we had at least 3 trans people, we had Black and ethnic minority people on there, we had old and young, and we had disabled and able-bodied, so it was big. 2005, every year after LGBT History Month was launched, there were questions in the House about, how dare these people do this, what the money was. You heard Paul Patrick's.
Yes.
We hoped to play it, but unfortunately we couldn't. But tell them about Paul.
Paul Patrick was interviewed on the Today programme by John McNaughty.
Yes.
And, sorry?
Jim
McNaughty. Yes, I used Jim McNaughty, that's right. And he was described as achingly politically correct by Tim Green, I think, the Tory MP that was speaking against him in the interview. And Jim tried to talk over and interrupt Paul in the way that these Today presenters do. But they hadn't reckoned on Paul's tenacity, and he just talked straight through and kept saying, let me finish, and he got all his points across. And he introduced the word invisibilised. David, is he still here? He was talking about the use of language and the meanings that we associate with language. And Paul invented the word invisibilised to describe what had deliberately been done to LGBT history over the past 200 years or so. We haven't been disappeared from history in a Stalinist way, we've been invisibilised, which is even bigger. It was a conscious effort to make us non-existent in the history books. And it was a tremendous interview, and it would be good if we could try to get it at some point during the course of the day.
Yeah, I have to go with it, it's not there. You might have it, oh brilliant, great. Angela Eagle got us a launch in the House of Commons, and of course Manchester Council got us a launch in that first year, so it was really important. It's the Daily Mail. Tell them about the Daily Mail.
It was actually the people that first picked up.
Oh, it was?
Because they were very interested in the fact that Paul had outed Shakespeare. Well, of course, you can't call Shakespeare gay, because the concept didn't exist in Shakespeare's time. But I think if you wanted to prove that he didn't have relationships with men, you'd have a very difficult job on your hands. And they invented, what were the titles of the plays? A Midsummer Night's Dream.
But what it taught us was, I mean, I remember Paul ringing me up and being absolutely panicked about it and us really worried. But it was really a useful lesson in the old saying, no news is bad news. It did get other people involved, it did get other people outraged, and it did sort of push the vote out a bit further. So we sort of get to the point now where you think, well, if the press are giving us a hard time, we're clearly doing something right, and we probably should carry on doing it definitely. But the Daily Mail's a great thing. First year we did quite a lot of resources, and the Amnesty International supported us. We produced lesson plans. Obviously, although we are an educational-based institution, but LGBT History Month is much wider than that. And the whole point of making it February was because it had a half-term in it, and that half-term was crucial because we knew it would be libraries and museums who would take it up first. It was exactly what happened. And therefore kids, parents, teachers would begin to see the exhibitions and the galleries and the museums and everything else and gain confidence to then pick it up and do it. And to this day, that's still true. I mean, and I think Jeff is doing some work with us for us next year, again in Manchester, the Valentine's weekend next year, where we're celebrating 10 years of LGBT History Month. We will beginning to look at what galleries and museums have done and historians have done, and I think it's going to be truly exciting as they've begun to really grasp the nettle and do more.
I think February is a very important month because when we're trying to get into schools, there are no exams to prepare for, there are no activities because the weather's awful. There's a half-term holiday for a week, so there's an opportunity to get out there and get into those museums and art galleries. And unless you belong to a family that's very, very rich and can take you on a skiing, the fact is you're going to be in this country, you're a captive audience, and you can attend these events when they take place. Tim?
Yeah, just to remind ourselves that we were also attacked that first year in The Observer. There was an article, I think, by Nick Cohen.
Yes.
And we were refused the right of reply. There were some very supportive letters, for example, from Kate Charlesworth, I think, the cartoonist.
Yes.
But it wasn't just the Daily Mail, it was The Observer, which is the last place at the time I would have expected it to come from.
Thanks for that.
I had just expunged that from my memory. I can't imagine why.
Wasn't Ben Summerskill writing for The Observer at the time?
He'd left.
He used to work on.
This was a really exciting project that we did. It was started off by Claire Anderson at Birmingham University, and she came up with this idea of stamping out homophobia, and we had sheets at every Pride, and I got buckets and paint, and she did, and we went all the Prides, and we invited people to put their feet in buckets of paint and then stamp on a sheet and then write something. And it then produced the longest petition that has ever been delivered to Parliament. So there's a YouTube film on it, there's the links there.
270 metres long.
And we took it to Becky Smith, who was the then Education Minister, who was somewhat overwhelmed by us all piling into her office. So you can see the film, it's very fun.
Not one member of the press was there.
Oh, well,
not one TV camera,
no.
not one.
Yes, and I think that is a really biggie, I think, that we're still struggling with. Jenny's tried, Julie now has picked up on communications. It is still very hard to get the press to cover positive stuff. They'll cover us as victims, but when we're not being victims, when we're being out there and proud and strong and beautiful, where are they? It's a real outrage, and I think it's a real biggie that as I pass the torch on, good luck.
More likely when we get murdered for being gay.
Oh yes, if we get murdered for being gay, not because of homophobia. That's just writing that. Stephen Lawrence was killed because he was black. No, he wasn't. He was killed because of racism. We get murdered for being gay. No, we get murdered because of homophobia.
Can I just say one thing very positive though? If you got The Independent on Thursday, there was a very good article about where we are, about the NUT, about schools out, and about our 40th anniversary, and about this conference, and about Peter. Peter got a mention as well.
But forgot to say where or when the conference was. So NHS helped us a bit, gave us a bit of money, and we produced something about how to do events for LGBT History Month. It was Paul that you've all been hearing about. And it was so funny, Tim, that you talk about Dusty, because Paul had a dog called Dusty, and when Paul died, I took over Dusty, and I walked Dusty on the beach yesterday morning in my new home in Broadstairs and said, we're going to be talking about your owner. So I have a daily reminder of dear Paul, and there he is in all his wonderment, and we owe so much to Paul and to John and to other members and to the people in the room. But yes, it was lovely hearing you guys talking about how important Paul was, because he's a much missed man. David Watkins, who is a member of our committee, used the law very successfully to challenge the homophobia that he suffered in his school. And the crucial difference about what David did was that he went all the way. Often what happens when teachers take their schools to court, or under whatever it is, whether it's about homophobia or anything else, the offer is to be bought off. And if you shut up, we'll give you a bit of money, but you then have to sign a gagging order, which means nobody knows what you've done and nobody learns. It's a torturous and horrendous process to go through. I'm seeing lots of nodding in the room. People know how difficult it is. Even though you have the whole support of the union behind you, you have the support of Schools Out, David went through hell. And it was a very painful process. but he hung on, and he was determined to get them to court to actually defend themselves. The irony was, we got there on the day, the headmistress didn't turn up, and the school was found in fault, and there was no actual case. He didn't actually have his moment in the employment tribunal to say anything, but he won. And he did not have a gapping order, so he could actually talk about it. There were articles in the TES, and that was splendid. And then that informed him to start the wonderful A Day in Hand campaign, which some of you will know about and have seen the website for. And so, David's moved on doing other things now, but that was rather wonderful. I think you picked this one up, didn't you? This is the whole thing that we were talking about of parents taking their kids out, and it's still happening to this day. So,
I think the important thing about these stories, the reason they're so insidious and so dangerous, is because the schools that do things that celebrate our histories and make us visible, when a story comes out about the parents withdrawing them and suddenly they find themselves on the front page of the Telegraph or the Mail, what it tells other schools is, don't do this, keep your head under the parapet. And it kind of closes down these avenues of making ourselves visible in schools, which is so important to us at a time when we're still not getting into enough schools. And I really can't voice enough my agony at these stories, because on the surface of it they don't sound terribly controversial, but the damage they do is immense.
And it goes back to that whole thing of, the press will pick up these stories. You'll see more of these, although Elly, you've been fairly successful to get some stories in the press now about successful working schools, haven't you?
Yeah, it's getting better all the time. Yeah.
So that it's balancing it.
Yeah.
Really weird. 2009, we actually get invited to dance. Really. And of course I'm there with my badges. Those of you who know about me and badges, So I'm there, I'm giving out the badges, and then the Labour Party suddenly take them over and say that it was our badges. Well, great, good. So they're getting out there, which is the main thing. Yeah, there's brooches, of course, the Labour Party has to call them, but never mind. Brilliant. So we're on, and I think you've got some nice pictures there. Elly gets in there because, of course, Elly, tell them, Elly.
What was I saying?
Well, why did you get to Downing Street?
Can't remember. What?
Yes, because you were voted.
Oh yes, number one on the pink list.
Yes. As an out lesbian teacher. All my Christmases came true. Fantastic. So 2011 we launched the classroom, which you've all been hearing about, so let's just on. How late are we? Oh, there we go. Elly Barnes is voted. And Ofsted produced a clear guidance. If you haven't seen it, look at it. It's brilliant. And some of Elly's work is in there as well, which is great.
On the other hand, the EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, has been told, which is also supposed to police the effectiveness of the public sector equality duty in schools, has been told by Michael Grove that they can't go into schools. They're mind their own business. They're not allowed.
TUC, crucial. Great supporters of us. We're there every year. The TUC starts our year, and it's really important to do that. LGBT Youth Northwest, we wouldn't be here but for them. I mean, they're just fantastic. The instigated the Pinafore Patrick Award. Pink Box, if you don't know about it, ask them about it because it's a wonderful thing. And they've done this wonderful and LGBT ambassadors in schools, so bless them. It's terrific. And we're part funded by the project that the lottery grant has done. So if you've got stories to tell, make sure you put them in people. Tony had coped with Europe. Tell them about Europe, Tony.
Well, okay. I worked with teachers in Italy, Bulgaria, the Basque Country in Spain, Brussels and Germany, and I think that's it, to produce a DVD and a CD-ROM with lesson plans and films, professionally made films, challenging homophobia and transphobia by challenging the stereotypes. What we did was we had a meeting and we got together and decided, although there were immense differences between our countries in terms of where we were going and where we were getting in terms of equality, one thing that was very common amongst our countries was all the stereotypes that we particularly around gender, femininity of the male, butch dykes and so on and so forth. All these concepts existed throughout. And so we worked on how to challenge these concepts with DVDs at various stages. There are cartoons, there are current affairs, and there are drama films, and we did a lesson plan for each one. I have to say the bureaucracy was an absolute nightmare. It's still ongoing. But we produced a DVD that went out in all of those countries and was handed out for free into schools. And the results have been, as far as I can ascertain, very positive. And we've had very good feedback from them. I know some people in this room have used them. And you? Yes. And there are still a few around if anybody wants to order one from.
Okay, things are flicking by because my guess is that we're at the time. So, the information is there. I think one of the things I just wanted to say to you is that the schools are passionate about being LGBT. We have consistently tried to make sure of that. Last year, we had the 4 faces of music, LGBT. The irony was we only had one white male, and it was interesting how many times the press wanted to talk about the one white male and not pick up the trans woman or the bisexual woman or the lesbian. We're hoping that isn't going to happen next year. We have an LGBT for next year. It's crucial that we keep pushing and we keep making it clear that we are a community of lesbians, gays, bisexual and trans. And the work that Youth Northwest does around trans issues is a crucial part of our work. But we continue to make sure that that's true. We continue to make sure that we are representative of the whole diversity of the LGBT community. We have masses still to do. Tony.
Yeah, I just want to say, because you heard about the NUT and the history that we had with them, we work very, very hard with the unions, and we've always been grassroots, and that's our determination to continue to have a good relationship with the trade unions. We work very well with the UCU on a project we're doing to do a timeline. This conference is supported by the ATL. The last launch was supported by the NASUWT and by the National Union of Teachers, who gave us a big grant of £3,500, with which we couldn't have gone ahead. Also, the NUT now has places on the executive, guaranteed place on the executive for an LGBT person. That person is Annette Rice, and she's here today.
Well, hey.
So, hey. And we'll be there, I hope, for a very, very long time to come. And also, I'm an old lag at those conferences. I've been going at them for over 10 years. The first one, I was handing out LGBT History Month leaflets, and somebody came out of the conference having read the leaflet, screwed it up into a ball and put it back in my hand. Okay, that's some of the attitudes that we were still getting 10 years ago. This year, our LGBT motion, which is about improving the law for trans teachers and supporting organisations like Schools Out in LGBT History Month, for the first time ever was passed unanimously. So let that be known.
Thank you very much, Sue.
Thank you.